may have covered Stranger Things, but this episode holds a critical role in our show.
How dare you?
This is It Belongs in a Museum. I'm Andy.
I'm Mark.
And he did the history research on this one. It's the history of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. It was a topic that you had done some cursory readings on.
I did a college paper on it. A common misconception, I think, was the premise. And it was like the satanic panic versus the fact that it was a bunch of nerds who were really normal, tax-paying, slacks and white socks kind of guys.
Yeah.
And I play tabletop games,
Yeah.
but I don't know the deep, multi-generational lore and books and extended universes and the people who made it.
Yeah, and we're going to hit some important characters, and I've given them their own pages. I have quite a few pages here.
I know Dash Rendar. You know Gary Gygax. And I only know Gary Gygax's name because Joe Manganiello says it a lot, and I know Joe.
Yeah. So on topic of Joe Manganiello, in his house in Beverly Hills, he has what was an old wine cellar that he converted into a dungeon master room, like a DM chamber. He's filled it with all his paraphernalia, and he calls it the Gary Gygax Memorial Dungeon. Apparently, it's because one of his players walked in and said, "Dude, Gary would have loved this." And it was before he had met Luke Gygax, Gary Gygax's son. But since then, he has that. And Gary Gygax is tied to D&D.
Not just because he sounds like a character you would encounter in a village.
And also, his name would be terrible to get in Wheel of Fortune. I mean, or like Hangman, because there's a Y and an X. You're never.
There's a Y. Oh, yeah, Gary, yeah.
Well, Gygax has a Y. Guy.
You're joking. Was he a Lilo and Stitch character?
He does sound like an alien, in terms of his name. So,
From whence does it begin? He didn't wake up in a tavern surrounded by strangers with an interesting quest?
No. He, as a kid, he was a fan of early wargaming. And back then, favorite game that had hex-based tiles was called...
hex-based?
Yeah, which is called Gettysburg.
Oh.
And it's a Civil War strategy game.
Did you know that the actor who played Grand Moff Tarkin was a miniature painter and a, like... he didn't do that. I think he did, like, the French Revolution or something like that. He did, like, European War. But he was a miniatures painter, and there's video footage of him explaining, like an aristocratic man, why you should paint historical miniatures and play the historical war
I want to
games.
see his TV production of
Sherlock Holmes?
Caves of Steel.
Oh.
Isaac
That's
Asimov
right,
story.
he did do that.
Yeah, it's really good. I want to watch it. But yeah, he played Gettysburg, a Civil War reenactment game, and he got his own blank tiles because he wanted to make his own map. And he is a Tolkien fan through and through.
Okay.
So he loves fantasy, and he loves strategy wargaming. Now, wargaming at the time, it was a lot more like the game Stratego or Risk or
I've only played the
chess.
Transformers Michael Bay edition of Stratego.
Or chess, where characters have set.
Michael Bay doesn't have a version of that, so I don't play it.
There's no dice. It's just this character is stronger than this character.
Oh.
They lose.
Interesting.
Or you have two of these characters next to each other, and you're fighting one of those. You add them together, and you do that. Like, it's just strategy.
I never thought of... Because I just think of, like, the D20 and stuff. So
rolling dice was actually Gary Gygax's idea.
What? Really?
Yeah, based on platonic solids for the shapes of the dice, like different values for different chances, because he wanted to have randomness.
He was a math nerd.
Yes.
My mind is still reeling from such a core fundamental element of so many tabletop settings.
Yeah. And this was something that he just liked making his own games and stuff, even though there wasn't really a market for it.
Hey, you know what? He does it for the love of the game.
Yeah, in 1967, he co-founded the International Federation of Wargamers, or IGF, along with Bill Spear and Scott Duncan. They got together, and it was basically a way of connecting different people who liked wargaming, because there really wasn't a big way to meet outside of, like hobby shops were not super big. It was just craft shops. Eventually, he organized a 20-person meeting of wargamers, along with a person named Dan Arnson and Brian Bloom. They ended up working on what they wanted their own war game to be.
I love when people have ideas and they just make a new thing. That is my favorite thing.
And their goal was to make something because they all loved Arthurian and chivalry and stuff like that.
I feel like I would have liked these guys.
So they called it Chainmail.
That's a good name.
Yeah, and I read a bit of what the rule set because that's online for free. You can just
Hmm.
read the original Chainmail
From
thing,
the IGF.
and yeah, it did like
Is it a cool setup? Like, is
yeah.
it?
What I really like about it is the fact that it is just like there was a stenographer in the room while he was explaining it to a room of people who were about to play. It's not like, here are the terms. This means that. This means that. Now, here are
It
the
was more
things.
conversational.
Yeah, and it was way better. I very much prefer that way of explaining things. Yeah, so they had the idea of rolling dice for this rather than just having strict values for things.
I like the probability.
You could be proficient in different weapons and stuff.
Nice.
And there were different types of troops you could have. You had like your, you know, people with cannons or, flintlocks or like swords and
And is
crossbows.
this for the chainmail or Gettysburg?
Chainmail
Oh,
is their original thing. But halfway through the book, they decided, you know what, we all love fantasy stuff. So let's put in optional rules. And here's rules for elves, orcs, dwarves, how that would work. Worked really, really well. Chainmail sold, I believe, they printed 1,000 copies at first. And since they already had the wargaming group
mm-hmm.
that was like connecting to a whole bunch of different other groups, they were able to sell 1,000 copies within 9 months.
Well, that's not too bad.
Yeah. Uh,
Especially like pre-internet stuff.
and so they had the idea of what if we just turn this into its own thing, but also like as much fun as it was to have like two warring armies,
Mhm.
and one of which were dwarves and elves and fantasy stuff. A lot of people wanted to be the individual characters.
They wanted like an avatar
Yeah.
of themselves.
Yeah. And so they had the idea, I was like, okay, well, what if instead of one person controlling an army, a whole bunch of people controlled one individual? Like you had a whole bunch of people controlling one army, each one had one person, and those people had different stats that they could do, and they were fighting one army.
Mm.
And they were just planning out this stuff of like what would be the most fun. Like a lot of the stuff that you would think, oh, it just naturally evolved, was very conscious decisions being made by this group. They made
It's like the real Council of Elrond
Yeah.
for wargaming.
Eventually they ended up in 1968. They established a game sort of system, like they established a group that could come together at a convention where people could play tabletop games.
Hmm.
They were housing at like a local place, but then the following year it grew so big that they couldn't accommodate it. So they moved to let's see, it was they had Lake Geneva Lodges around there. It was the hotel and spa. They moved it to and called it Lake Geneva Wargaming Convention, or Gen Con.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I actually know that.
That's where Gen Con comes from. That was Gary Gygax organized the first one.
Huh.
And that is one of two conventions that Gary is directly responsible for. He worked on a couple different things. He had this thing that was called the Strategic Review Magazine, which was a sort of newsletter to help people know about wargaming and stuff.
That's cool.
But whenever they started making Dungeons and Dragons, which is sort of a successor to the fantasy of Chainmail, they changed it to The Dragon, or Dragon Magazine, which is a big deal now. Like, it's
I feel like I've seen that in vintage shops.
yeah, there were so many of them. There were like hundreds, and they hired people specifically to write articles and stuff about them, which is relevant to what we'll be talking about soon. But as time passed, he eventually stuff started to change in a negative way. They hired people, but a lot of those people passed away, and shares and stock were being moved to other people who had different goals, and eventually Gary left the group that he had started. Along with Don Kay, he founded a group that called Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR. And they're the ones who owned Dungeons and Dragons. He left that because shares got divvied around, and it stopped being what he wanted.
It was less about, wouldn't this be a fun thing, and became more about how can we maximize profit.
And even while he was making D&D, they were making advanced D&D at the same time, which he was not really okay with. He's like, it needs to be simple, but they're like,
Oh,
no, we need to make it complex so that people who like wargaming can play.
interesting.
And he was not a huge fan of that. So there were two competing Dungeons and Dragons things
Wow,
that had very different rules.
that
Uh,
sucks.
yeah, and when second edition came out, Gary was already like going to leave.
Mm.
And second edition, they changed some stuff, but by and large, it was still a two-pronged. You had basic D&D and advanced D&D. Uh, yeah, and it was like crazy. Second edition, uh, they had to deal with satanic panic stuff. So the world changed. They things like demons, devils, sexual themes,
All the
evil
cool stuff.
evil character options like playing as an assassin or a half orc were removed. Uh, Spells were then categorized. It's like this is destruction magic. This is necromancy. Uh,
Leave it to nerds, and I don't mean like cool nerds, like the annoying ones that don't have fun, to look at it something inspired by Tolkien, like a dude who is like him and C.S. Lewis are like the Christian authors that everyone
yeah,
talks about, and be like, that's too satanic. Like, are you dumb?
yeah.
Are you stupid?
But it,
No, I don't like big butts. That's
but
not true. I cannot lie.
uh, this is also when they were like, okay, well, if we can't be super violent, what if we had it where you could talk your way up an argument? You were good at talking to people, and that's when skills became a thing.
Uh,
And that's also when they were like, well, we need some new settings that are less sexualized violence. So that's
can
when
you
they
make a list of the sexualized and violent settings for me in the future?
sure. That's where you get like Ravenloft that was meant to be more of a gothic horror. It's where you
Hmm.
get Spelljammer that was sci-fi, and where you get Dark Sun, which was apocalyptic. And
Wait,
that one's
how is that one not violent and sexual? It's Mad Max Gimp Gear.
that one was sexual, but that's because they couldn't get the guy to compromise.
You know what? Who made that one? I want.
I can't remember, but I remember how he had it started because he drew a picture of a priestess in a large headdress and not much else behind like a desert and stuff like that, and he had that framed over his work cubicle. And when they were looking at potential new worlds, they were going to their artist to come up with ideas,
And they're
and
like the John Carter looking art.
they're like, "What's that?" And he was like, "It's just something I drew and I like it." It's like, "Can you make that a world?" And so he had the idea of a sorcerer king and magic poisoning the world. Dark Sun is a really underappreciated world. It's awesome. Uh,
I respect the hell out of someone who's like, I have a cool idea. Can you change it? No.
yeah, it's it's kind of wonderful in a way. Uh, in 1997, that's when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR. Uh, that's when they decided, you know what, we're done with this two-pronged approach that you guys keep going for D&D. It's going to be one. There's no advanced, no basic. It's just one D&D that's combined. Uh, they unified the rules. They added skills and feats, which were the feats were literally perks from Fallout, because Fallout 1 had released earlier that year,
That makes sense.
and it had blown up.
It's a good
And
system.
so yeah, they that was sort of the end of Gary Gygax's run in things. In second edition growing, after he left, they needed a new person to like sort of fulfill that role in a new world, because Greyhawk was the world that he had invented, and it
Okay.
didn't have a lot of bones to it. Come in, Ed Greenwood. He was one of the
He was
writers.
the president of National Treasure.
No. TSR was looking for a new world for their Advanced Dungeons and Dragons along with 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Greenwood wrote stuff for Dragon Magazine.
Okay.
And there was literally, when they were looking for New World, they asked him about, because he had been writing lore compendiums of like optional stuff for years, and he still has a YouTube channel that he answers questions on.
Nice.
Yeah,
Like Tim Kaine.
yeah, and the character he invented that's very much part of the world
Yeah.
is Elminster, who appears in Baldur's Gate 3. He's the one who
Haven't played it yet.
he talks to the wizard character. If you keep him in the party, they'll interact. But he was asked when they were like potentially going to use his world that he had been making since he was a kid, like
Hmm.
in like
Which is not Greyhawk. It's
Forgotten Realms.
Forgotten Realms.
That was what he called his world. They asked,
I've seen that on the like spines of books for
yeah,
D&D currently.
yeah. They asked, do you make this stuff up as you go, or do you actually have a huge campaign world? He responded, yes.
Fair enough.
Uh,
You know what? Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so whenever the sale went through, he gave them boxes of loose leaf papers that had notes in it, and he sold it to the world to them for $50,000 in 80s money, which is roughly $450,000 now, along with the rule that they would publish anything he wrote.
That's rad. That is a sweet contract.
Yeah. So he effectively did not have a job
That's
at that
awesome.
point because he didn't need it. He just got to keep writing in the world that he had been writing in already.
That is like every creative person's dream like
Yeah.
scenario.
He looks like a wizard. He has a very large white beard
Is
and
he Alan Moore?
white hair, but his face is so baby faced.
Ah,
And he has just the energy of a 9-year-old
so
who you just asked about sharks.
so like a gnome, not a dwarf.
Yeah, it's a very strange situation of like seeing him. He has youthful energy, and it's
Hmm.
really interesting. I'm not huge into Forgotten Realms deep lore.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer more like this is the reason you should care about it.
Fair enough.
So when when TSR fell into some financial issues around second edition not selling well because you're competing with yourself with D&D basically.
Yeah.
He
EA did that
they
to themselves a couple
had
times.
some issues selling stuff, and he actually offered to come back and write them some stuff till they got back on their feet. They never got back to him, and TSR filed for bankruptcy and was bought by Wizards of the Coast.
Which is like the brand that
Which,
still owns them.
yeah,
And is making that Snake Eyes game.
yeah.
I really like Snake Eyes, so that's
About 2 years after they had bought, Wizards had bought them, and they had been getting some fixing what was D&D at the time, trying to streamline stuff. The CEO of it called up Ed Greenwood at the current job that he had where he was a librarian and said, "Hey, we want you to come back to start writing lore for us." And he started helping with 3rd edition and 3.5 edition,
okay.
which instead of having advanced and basic, combined the two into a bunch of optional rule set, and this was in 1997. So they had some like interesting lore that they were coming out with. Yeah, the CEO of Wizards called them. I have the note here to confirm that. Now, he was not the only person working at Dragon Magazine who they were like potentially going to give a world. The other two,
Which is such a silly, like, I would like to offer you a world.
yeah, well, like the main world.
Yeah, I
like
know.
the
It's
D&D
just
movie is in the Forgotten Realms universe.
the one with the blue lipstick man or the one with Chris Pine?
What?
In the cake that people fall into?
I don't know what you're talking
A
about.
Wayland brother falls into a cake rug.
What's a Wayland brother? Anyway, Dragonlance,
Okay.
the thing that got Joe Manganiello.
Dragonlance, I barely know him.
Oh, Dragging Lance.
Wow, you're so smart.
My brain is currently in the 80s right now. Okay? So,
Great Scott.
Laura and Tracy Hickman, they're a married couple
Good for
living in Utah. They have kids, and they are fantasy writers.
them.
They had joins up, and a guy approaches them. Hey, I have an idea for a collaboration with you guys. Basically, we come together and we make, and because this is like early technology, potentially a video game, like PC fantasy stuff, and we want you guys in on it. They go into work, handshake agreement. The guy runs off with the money.
I was gonna as soon as you said handshake agreement,
They are left $30,000 in debt.
does the guy who did that to them ever get like
No,
strung up?
no
in
one
public?
even knows his name.
I hate that.
So
I hope him and his bloodline are ashamed of
so
themselves.
they're screwed at this point.
I'm gonna find that man.
They
Like Liam
literally
Neeson.
are driving to Wisconsin to go and interview with TSR to try and get a job because that's their only hope.
I thought it was Wizards at this point.
No, we're back in time. This is
Okay.
they were writers for Dragon Magazine,
Right,
so
yeah.
part-time. They're trying to get this up and running. They're trying to get for like an actual job for at least one of them.
This is running parallel to the man who sells his 14-year-old dreams.
Yes. So and on the car right there, they start talking about what if, like Lord of the Rings, you had a world that existed to tell a story rather than just here's a loose sandbox world. And what if we made dragons scary again?
Finally.
So
Sorry, Toothless.
They had this idea. and they had this chance encounter with a woman named Margaret Weiss
Okay.
when they got there. Margaret Weiss was an editor for a couple different journals and stuff like that, but she wanted to be a writer.
Mm.
She was working there as an editor. She applied for a writer that gave her editor.
Mm.
Every place she's worked, she has gotten promotions.
Mm.
She is tough as nails and talented like crazy. They meet and they pitch the idea, and immediately the idea is not let's make an RPG with this world. It's let's make an RPG and some novels and fancy stuff, and let's get some cross pollination going.
Hmm.
You go for the novels because they're cool and the artwork's awesome, but you go in
80s novels do have sick art.
Yeah, and you can find there's hundreds of Dragonlance novels. And the first one is called like The Autumn Twilight.
Mm-hmm.
That's on YouTube for free. You can listen to it as an audiobook.
Hmm.
So they meet, they get it. What happens is Laura and Tracy, they end up selling two D&D adventures to D&D, literally so they could afford shoes for their children.
Mm.
And they're crazy awesome. One is called Pharaoh, and they both have kind of an Egyptian curse vibe
Cool.
to them. And so they're brought in as like, okay, you could help us write some stuff.
So unlike Brendan Fraser, they don't hate mummies.
No, they start writing like crazy. They end up writing a setting called Ravenloft for Greyhawk, which is
Okay.
where we get Curse of Strahd, which is a current
Yeah.
D&D adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Originally, before it was called Dragonlance, they called it Project Overlord
Which is
they
a great name.
They wanted something epic, awesome, and scary, something that would just grab you.
I like that name more, personally.
So what happened was they ended up sort of offloading the workload for these novels. Margaret Weiss, who was a fantastic writer,
Mhm.
she ended up writing a lot of the stories, but Laura and Tracy are the ones building out the world, defining stuff, and helping come up with the narrative that like grips you together. She has experience as a writer. They're the ones who have a story they want to tell. And
That's a good team.
they are currently still like I don't know if they're still writing Dragonlance or but I know they are still writing.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah, they're
Passion never dies
yeah.
out.
And there was talks of them when they were going to make a live action TV show that was Dragonlance. They were already very involved, saying, "Here's what you can do if you want to talk more of this rather than that stuff," because we didn't talk about it in the books. But here's what we had on paper.
Like when the Fallout show was doing stuff, I liked that you would see previous Fallout writers for the games being like, yeah, that what they're doing is totally fine. Like we agree with the choices they made.
Yeah,
I like when an adaptation that doesn't need to necessarily copy one to one gets the approval of some of the people. That's cool.
And I think that's in a way they kind of worked with it because 3.5, which still was 3 but with added stuff added onto it, optional rules, that got loaned out to Troika Games, which was started by Tim Kaine, who was a Fallout programmer. They asked, "Can you take this D&D adventure and make it a thing?" He coded it, and the changes he made, like the little changes, are permanent to D&D now.
Wait, Tim Kaine feeds into permanent D&D.
Yeah,
Good for him.
Most famously, it was his like a game he made called Temple of Elemental Evil by Troika Games. You can get it on Steam, and it's a classic D&D adventure of like weird, like there's 4 temples, each of them has an element to them, and you're dealing with some crazy people trying to stop an end of the world and whatever they're summoning. He put in some stuff, like he had the idea of Zagutmoy, the demon priestess of fungus and mind control. Previously, she looked like a stingray made of fungus, like stingray face on a pile of fungus.
Weird.
He was like, what if she looked more bridal, where it was like a big dress and a female shape, but it was all made out of fungus, so it's dangerous yet enticing.
Like a mossy tree veil.
Yeah.
Face. That's cool.
And that is permanent.
I like that.
And I bring up special shout out to Troika Games and Temple of Elemental Evil because there was recently a book that talked about the history of D&D and like the change stuff and talked about the games that sort of influenced it. They were left out entirely.
Really?
And it is very hard to find people shout out to Temple of Elemental Evil despite all the changes it made that are considered permanent.
Look at you, real journalism.
So shout out to Troika Games, which made Vampire the Masquerade Bloodline.
Oh.
Yeah. They've made 3 games. All 3 of them were influential in crazy ways. They only broke up because they were like, running a company's hard. Let's just work for someone else. It's fine. and Tim Kaine worked for a couple other people and retired, and they made New Vegas.
Yeah.
So you're
The most
welcome.
fun game you'll watch crash over and over again.
Yeah. The most fun game you'll watch people complain about them changing in the TV show.
Oh
Uh,
boy. We lit that fire for you.
yeah, but 3.5, which is what Temple of Elemental Evil was running on,
Uh-huh.
it also added greater character customization. It unified, made it simple to approach, and added a whole bunch of options for customization. And you could take on all the complexity, new rules you wanted with feats, but the person next to you didn't have to. And I realized it was very similar to like sandwich making. If you were just like, you could have as much as you want on your sandwich, the person next to you can have as little, and you can both sit down and eat the same meal.
Mm.
Like that's what D&D at its like best, like RPGs at their best, is here's a simple setting that's not hard to explain. Here's a rule set that's easy, and you can add as much as you want.
Mm.
Those are the ones that do crazy well. Yeah, and so they that plus they had what was called the Open Game License, the
Mm.
OGL, which basically said, look, it wasn't super concrete, but it was like you can make stuff and we won't sue you.
Mm.
Like you can
You
make
can make like a D&D style adventure.
yeah, you can't say D&D and you can't say Dungeons and Dragons and you can't use Forgotten Realms stuff. You can make
You can use the gameplay system.
yeah, you can use the rules and you can make your own stuff, which is where we get Pathfinder, which is probably D&D's biggest competitor
Hmm.
was 3.5. And in 2024 they were announcing they were going to do another Pathfinder thing literally because of OGL nonsense that was happening, which we will get to. Uh yeah, they ended up making some not wise decisions after 3.5 because they were like, dude, we changed like D&D for the better. It's no longer two things, it's one thing. We fixed everything. We brought back old writers. Now let's fix the rest of the stuff that wasn't broken. And that's where 4th edition comes in. One of the most hated
Which is the one with the super like hardcore art style?
4th edition.
Oh, well, I like the art style.
Yes. So basically what they did,
That's like what was the Fallout game that had really edgy art style?
oh, Brotherhood of Steel.
See, sometimes the games aren't good, but the art is pretty sick.
So yeah, they changed a lot of the cosmology because of satanic panic. A lot of people were complaining like, you can be evil, you can be demons and whatever. So they made it where the devil character, he changed because of lore reasons.
Imagine if they asked,
Demons were no longer demons, they were corrupted elementals.
imagine if they asked Tolkien to change Sauron to not be as evil.
Like it was
Pathetic, stupid. Censorship is dumb, and that's dumb, and everyone who did that was dumb.
They changed the entire world. They killed off certain gods.
That seems a little heretical.
So if you were a like in
is that the magic death thing that you guys always
spell
talk about?
plague?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes.
Ha!
Literally, whenever they were making, like if you were a paladin of Lathander, he's dead now. Deal with it.
So you just have no magic anymore.
Or well, you just have to basically make a new character. Tough.
That's dumb.
Yeah.
So they not only ruined the setting, but they made existing characters unplayable.
But they made some good changes too. For one thing, being a wizard was no longer way better than being a fighter. Fighters now had special things that they could do.
Okay.
Like they had and suddenly every class was on the same playing field.
Mm.
They emphasized storytelling rather than just like killing stuff. So like there was more narrative stuff and the stories were a bit more rich and thought out. And it introduced the Dragonborn race
Oh.
because people wanted to play as a dragon.
Not to be confused with the Dragonborn from Skyrim, where you're just
which literally gets its name from 4th edition Dragonborns. Like they've said, we just stole the name from D&D.
Fair enough. I mean, Fallout stole the whatever design for the Deathclaw.
Yeah, that was the Tarask from D&D.
Yeah.
Now, then,
fair is fair.
With 4th edition caused a lot of people to leave, and a lot of people got upset, which meant only core fans were still playing.
Did they at least try to appeal to them in the future?
We'll get to that. But also a lot of developers left.
Oh.
And because they're like, this is a sinking ship, we're leaving. We've seen D&D do this before.
Right.
So they left. And some of them started things like Gary Gygax created Castles and Crusades, a tabletop game that he wanted to blended original D&D with 3.5. A lot, and it was part of Troll Lord Games, I believe was amazing names for all these companies. But a lot of people left. and the ones who stayed were hardcore people, one of which was Mike Merles, a man of questionable quality.
Okay.
Uh, because early 5th edition, he made the monster manual, he made the basic rules, and he made the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
The OGL I mentioned, the open game
Yeah.
license. A, an update happened to
Mm-hmm.
it, which meant it was made to supposedly prevent NFTs using D&D stuff and prevent hateful content like racist
Hmm.
content. And there have been some like that. I remember one saying like it was a homebrew content that was like much like in real life, not all races are equal.
Oh,
So I'm not going to say that's baseless.
yeah. Every group has bad
However,
people in it.
let's bring up the issues that people had with this. They claimed to try and get, like Hasbro, which owns Wizard of the Coast, said
Mm-hmm.
they were trying to increase profits by 50% over the next 3 years.
That's why they're making the Snake Eyes. Hasbro. With that make okay, that makes sense now. I thought that
Uh,
was a weird
so
correlation.
people brought up that like their plans, had this gone through, would not have helped.
Yeah, that's a lot of
Because they're like,
businesses.
it would have at most netted them $4,000
Mm-hmm.
or $4 million, which is considering they're $1 billion company.
Not a
Not,
lot,
yeah, it's not,
percentage wise.
yeah. But they also had the idea of OneD&D, which was the name for it.
Mm-hmm.
ONED&D.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, the premise was, well, you can come join our group and you can make stuff that's officially published.
Uh,
And however, if you're not part of that group,
then you make something.
yes, you are required to pay royalties, assuming you make a certain amount of money, which meant things like Critical Role
Yeah,
were under fire, and they were potentially going to have to pay a royalty fee per episode,
which
which is
is dumb.
weekly.
Yeah, which is dumb. And a good way to kill fan content, which is
Oh,
what keeps your
the
brand alive.
the brand loyalty on this, they realized how fragile it was because immediately Pathfinder said we're going to start making a sequel. Critical Role began the early vestiges of working on what is called Daggerheart now, which
Mm-hmm.
is releasing later in May.
Mm-hmm.
As of recording, it will have come out by the time of this,
Yeah.
but it was in beta. Uh, a whole bunch of other content and stuff and RPGs just blew out of the fact that they were like, hell no, we won't.
But in a way that is kind of like the Gary Gygax, like, hey, this is cool stuff, but what if we made our own? Except instead of out of like creative fun, is kind of out of like Johnny Silverhand burned the corporation to the
Yeah.
ground.
So, to their credit, Wizards of the Coast, they were like, oh, we're going to talk about this over here. Like, over a couple of next years, we're going to debate what needs to happen, what you want the new creative license to be. And basically, everyone was like, go to hell. We don't want anything to change. So, they did make a change.
Hmm.
They put 5e, the core rules,
Mm-hmm.
in Creative Commons license.
Which is a good guy move.
Yeah, that
in
is
my
a.
opinion.
And honestly, that is not only what they had, but it is now way more secure. Like, D&D cannot attempt to strike royalties on anything.
Yeah, it's not like
which
a handshake
also,
agreement anymore.
which also means now, like, if you were making a sci-fi world or just an original story, you could put a tiefling in there because a tiefling is now in the Creative Commons of a
Oh,
race.
so it's not just the rule set.
No, it's like now the idea of a tiefling itself.
Hmm.
Granted, D&D put out 5.5, which added optional new rules.
Because they need to sell you books.
Yeah. Granted, what they did was kind of awesome. They introduced the new rules were really cool. The new monsters were awesome. New artwork was fantastic and might actually be better than 4th edition.
Hmm.
The Death Knight being a prime example of that. And the stats changes they made to existing characters were better. Once again, Death Knight. Instead of Death Knight in 5th edition, they could throw a fireball once a day.
Mm-hmm.
If you missed, tough luck. And so the fight just got way easier. Instead, it's now like, oh, they can throw it, but there's like a rule for how many times they can throw it in a short amount of time.
Mm.
And they can do way more cooler stuff, and they have way more necrotic evil, because they're undead knights that have done so many heinous things that their body refuses to die.
Cool.
Yet they're awesome. And that's currently where we are D&D wise in terms of efficacy and the way the game has evolved. But from, hey, what if we roll dice, to here's like a whole bunch of complex rules, and D&D Beyond, which now is such a necessary tool for a lot of people. There are dungeon masters who have trouble getting their players to not use it.
Mm.
because it just does the math for you. It's
It
great.
has dice built into it,
Yeah, and it's just way easier to check things and look things up by just controlling tabs
which
rather
is
than
good
flipping through
for
papers.
Wizards and Hasbro because you can pay subscriptions to buy
Yeah,
extra access to extra
yeah, and
things.
Wizards has been doing. They really should have just tried to become Steam rather than try
Yeah,
to become. And people bring up it's like they're really just doing it for control or the fact that the people making the decisions didn't know how the system worked or how much money they would actually get.
that sounds about right with Hasbro and
Yeah.
big companies like that.
That being said, currently there are things like Daggerheart and Pathfinder 2 and stuff which are getting announced at Gen Con,
Hmm,
quite fittingly.
right.
Uh, and they're potentially taking place of these things. D&D as a whole is kind of sitting there, and Joe Manganiello, to bookend this last bit, he has brought up that Baldur's Gate 3, a game that had been in development, I think
A
before,
long time.
yeah, before the OGL controversy stuff happened.
Yeah.
It came out and it was a prime example of what D&D should be. You take D&D world, you hand it to someone who loves it, and you let them run wild and show how much they love it.
Hmm.
That being said, D&D media has been rough because that OGL stuff happened right at the time the D&D movie was releasing in theaters.
Which I enjoyed.
Yeah, but it didn't do as well. And
Money.
the dumb money men who
Mm-hmm.
were making these decisions were like, why isn't it doing as good as Avengers? Despite the fact that Avengers had movies leading up to it.
Yeah, it has like 5, 6 movies leading up, and they're characters that
Exist.
mainstream people have known for almost 100 years.
Yeah, and
Dude, Avengers legitimately ruined Hollywood.
yeah,
It's so dumb.
that's the thing. They are trying like the
Make a John Wick for 30 million instead of a $300 million
that
superhero movie.
yeah that caused
So
them
dumb.
to shut down Dragonlance live action show production, but now they're in talks of making a Forgotten Realms thing with Netflix, and it's really just because they cannot get out of the idea of having a shared universe world. Yeah, I think what happens with D&D is it's going to do what it's always been doing, which is subtly influencing a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different stuff. What they need to be doing is just differentiating into merch, movies, shows, comics, and probably try and bring back Dragon Magazine to some level.
I mean, that
Uh,
could be like an online
what
thing.
I think, well, that's the thing. If they did Dragon Magazine with D&D Beyond, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like you pay a subscription, and at the end of every book, here's a new monster stat.
But
Here's
Warhammer
here's some
has a
lore stuff.
monthly magazine that
Yeah,
you can get, and it has like special rules, and sometimes it'll come with like a mini or something like
yeah,
that. D&D should. Warhammer is making stupid money.
yeah,
Just steal a couple plays from their book. As someone who is going to be paying the price of plastic I pay for Warhammer, especially with the Trump tariffs, D&D just rip off Games Workshop.
yeah. I mean, it's working for them,
Get Joe Manganiello to be your Henry Cavill
and that's like he was set
or
up.
Deborah Ann Wall.
He
She's a nerd.
That's the thing. Joe Manganiello, whenever they were greenlighting the Dragonlance thing, he was set up as a brand ambassador, which was a paid position. That
Sick.
he was just meant to talk about how much he loved D&D, do some interviews. They need to just hand him the reins to Dragonlance and just say, "Go nuts." So, yeah. Question is, does D&D belong in a museum?
I think with the way that it's so entwined with pop culture and with tabletop gaming, which is a huge hobby and blew up during COVID again, as like an online thing people would do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be in a museum. I'm almost certain that it is in a museum somewhere.
The artwork on some of this stuff is just wonderfully old
Hmm.
because it's like old-timey, only black and white printers. So it's like the school printer
Yeah.
artwork, and I love that stuff, especially when apparently the first D&D had like or the first is either first D&D or first their chainmail game
Mm-hmm.
had like a budget for art that was $100,
Huh.
and the overall budget was like $1,000 or less than.
Yeah.
Might have been $400 for like the whole thing, and it ended up selling out in 9 months.
It's gotta feel good.
I mean, nerds like fantasy.
At the end of the day, you roll your dice, you move your knights, nobody gets hurt.
You know, when I was playing this out, I was potentially going to use that line. I was like, no, that's stupid. I would get called out for that. But you are as caffeine deprived as, apparently puts you at my level of stupid.
I am very tired today.
Yeah, you've had a rough one.
Thank you for watching, and remember, something that'll tease your brain that makes you think, wow, I should subscribe to this channel and watch more of their things. They're so smart and insightful. Wow, I like them. That's what I would say here if I had caffeine.